Rodney, Dr. Najar, the trustees, members of the faculty, many of whom are still wondering how I ended up here. Families and friends of the class of 2012, other than Charlie Johnson. We'll chat later. It is an absolute pleasure to be back here at Dwight-Englewood. I have to admit something. I don't have a clue who my speaker was. I don't know what he or she said. I'm not even sure we had a speaker. Which I guess runs counter to the theory that being a graduation speaker is one of the hardest speeches one can give. Because I can virtually promise none of you will remember any of this. And nor should you. Because at most I am an exclamation point. And you have all written the sentence, the paragraph, the speech that have gotten you this far. I do remember on this day when whoever it was stood up, I was mostly thinking about the parties tonight, how tan I was going to get this summer, and now as a parent, you can simply fill in your greatest fear at the end of that sentence and what else might happen. But when I was sitting there wearing a blue gown, I'm quite sure I wasn't expecting to be standing here 25 years later. I have no idea, Rodney, why it took you so long to invite me. But even having won the very embarrassing title of Biggest Ego, I will say I shared that award, which was, I thought, somewhat contradictory. Even if I didn't know I was going to be standing here, I had even less of a sense of what path might take me to this point. And what I'm about to say, when I thought about what I was going to say, I thought about the ways that Dwight-Englewood influenced me. You can't help not. But slightly contrary to what Rodney said, I'm not going to tell you that when I was sitting in US history class, this is what I wanted to do. And as I struggled through calculus, I am so sorry, Mr. King. Believe me, I never thought I would be working with computer software engineers today. And Mr. King is probably writing my chief executive officer right now telling him why I should not be. I certainly in those experiences wasn't thinking about terrorism or Yemen. And taking that law class with Freemy Sagan and Roseanne Byron, I was not thinking about Guantanamo Bay. But it was those pieces that were the foundation for all of this. It was learning history from Frank Mahoney. It was reading the infamous case of Korematsu about the incarceration of Japanese Americans with Freemy Sagan and Roseanne Byron, which started to lay the building blocks for how I had tried to approach things recently. And my apologies, I've apologized once, but I have to apologize again to Chris Schmidt. I still remember the shot on Solomon Field, so while you'll forget my speech, you won't forget failures like that. Of the homecoming game against Montclair Kimberly. The ball in my hands until it wasn't, and it was in the net, and we lost 2-1. And I did think of that as I missed some shots from Al-Qaeda and the like, knowing that all of those experiences helped position me for dealing with both the good and the bad. Although in Chris Schmidt's revisionist history yesterday, he noted that we were 15-5 my year, which would have been much more pleasant than the 5-15 we actually were. And a final piece that I never could have imagined would lead from Dwight-Englewood to where I was, but one that is, to those of us who've lived through this, more emotional than any. We're calling back to my prom in 1987. It was held no other place than the North Tower of the World Trade Center. And to be a part of 20 years later and 25 years later, reflecting on those moments and trying to bring some justice to all the people, including the Dwight-Englewood family, who suffered such a grave loss 10 years ago. What I did take from what John King and others in the math department taught me was what I think they would call how non-linear life can be. Some things are easy equations and point in definite directions. But I had little idea, and in fact, I might have been a little scared, and I know my mother would have been terrified if I had known when I was sitting where you are today what that path would be. Or, in the immortal words of a former father of a girlfriend of mine, you really can't hold down a job, can you? It hasn't felt conventional from my perspective either. I very clearly remember walking into the Oval Office the first time. President Bush was sitting in his chair. There's a Freudian one. Vice President Cheney was sitting in the other chair. Actually gives me an opportunity to put in a plug for my employer, NBC. You should really see the Saturday Night Live skit with Will Ferrell. But I remember walking in and thinking, I was between Judge Michael Mukasey and the director of the FBI, Bob Mueller, and I said, how in God's name did a kid from New Jersey end up here? And then I started wondering, when was everyone else in the room going to start asking me the same question? Thankfully, they didn't. And an almost equally surreal moment happened last April when I came back and had the honor of speaking to students and families here about terrorism. And this was April 2011. And it was a fabulous experience to talk to students who were, frankly, far more diverse and far more aware of the world than my class was 25 years ago, to talk about terrorism, to talk about the Arab awakening. And I remember that evening someone asked, do you think we'll ever find bin Laden? And I gave the best bureaucratic answer I could, which was, boy, I hope so, but who knows? All the while knowing that a few weeks later, on May 1st, we had the incredible experience, and I had the incredible experience of being there as we saw brave Americans from states like New Jersey, in Pakistan, finally bringing a bit more justice after those days of September 11th. But I will tell you, even then,